Computer. Hello, everyone. Welcome to Skype a Scientist Live. Today, we are going to be talking with scientist Jess Atkin all about growing food on the moon. These sessions happen about once a month during the North American school year, so from September to about May. Next month, we're going to be talking about how to use the variety of microscopes available to scientists and how that can a lot of times feel kind of like doing art. There's a lot of intersections between art and science, both in terms of like painting, communicating science with each other. But even when we're using our scientific instruments, it can be a little bit arty. So we're going to be talking all about that with a microscopist, a person whose whole job is using very big, expensive microscopes to do science and art. So that'll be next month. Check it out. In the meantime, for housekeeping for today, the way this works, we're going to be talking for about the next 45 minutes all about growing food on the moon. How this is going to work, you are going to submit your questions via the Q&A function in the bottom of the Zoom screen. Please only submit questions one time. If you have a question, if you submit it multiple times, it won't get asked any faster because there are generally so many of you that we try to get through as many questions as we can. If you want to have a session for just your class, that's absolutely available to you. You can go to skypeascientist.com, click sign up, and then you can sign up for just your classroom if you have a particularly curious, question-heavy group of learners. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Jess Atkin. Thank you so much for joining us, Jess.
Hey, thanks for having me. Hello, everybody. I'm really excited to be here with you guys today. I'm going to share my screen. Can you guys see that?
Yes,
Let me, it's not quite big enough. Sorry about that.
all good.
So, my name is Jess, and right now I am an intern at NASA working on part of a really cool project sending plants to the moon on the Artemis 3 mission. I am also a researcher at Texas A&M University, and my area of study is how to make moon dust clean and safe enough to grow crops on the moon when astronauts get there. Now, you may be asking yourself, why do we need plants in space? Well, this is just a few of the reasons. There's quite a bit, but the number one reason I'd have to say is food for the astronauts. We want to be able to keep our astronauts healthy and strong. Right now, the food that is grown aboard the International Space Station is just supplemental. We have to send up most of their food with supply missions. Now, we're able to do that from Earth and get these supplies to the ISS that is 250 miles above us within 20 hours. But as we adventure out to the moon, to Mars, and hopefully beyond, it's going to take us longer and it's going to be a little bit more tricky to get the supplies there. So researchers right now are working on the International Space Station trying to figure out what we can do to grow these crops in sufficient amounts to account for more of the diet. Beyond just giving us food, plants do quite a bit of things for us. They actually provide us oxygen. We have this really cool trade-off with plants. Humans like to breathe in oxygen and breathe out carbon dioxide, but plants like to take in carbon dioxide and give off oxygen. So it's a really great trade that we have with each other to make sure everybody breathes a little bit easier. Oxygen is actually not the only thing that plants produce. They can produce water vapor. It's just a small amount, but the cool thing about this water is it's completely clean and pure. Now, when you're on a spaceship, you don't get to take very many supplies with you. So astronauts can go collect this water in an area where every single drop counts. Now, I like this picture right here. You can see two astronauts doing some space gardening aboard the International Space Station, and you can see that they're kind of happy. And that's because studies have shown that plants in space improve astronauts' happiness and relaxation. So in an area where you're really far from home, it helps to have some good vibes around, right? So these are just some of the reasons we need plants in space, but when we take plants that are supposed to be grown on Earth and we grow them in space, things get a little tricky. And there's even more challenges when we go further and get to the moon. When we leave when we leave Earth, we lose a lot of our gravity. The moon has 1/6 of the Earth's gravity. And gravity gives really cool signals to plants that tells them to grow their roots downwards and anchor into the soil to reach out and grab nutrients and water. When the plants don't have that signal, they don't really know what to do, and they kind of grow haywire, and they don't know how to get food and how to get nutrients. It stresses them out. On top of that, when we leave Earth, we leave the protection of our atmosphere. And one of the things that our atmosphere protects us from is radiation. I like to think of radiation as a really powerful, invisible energy that comes from the sun and other stars, and it can make things break down kind of quickly. In space, this stresses out equipment, humans, and plants. So scientists are working on how to create shields to protect all of these things. When you get further and you go down to the moon, there comes a whole new host of challenges because lunar moon dust is also called lunar regolith, and it has some crazy problems. One, it's very, very small because it doesn't have an atmosphere, and it's always getting hit by space rocks with nothing to slow it down. When it hits the moon, it crushes up the moon rocks into a very fine powder, almost like a baby powder. But it's not just a soft, fluffy powder like you would think. It's actually full of glass and very sharp. It's also positively charged, so it will stick to all of your equipment. It will get into the astronauts' suits and make little micro tears. It can even cut up the roots of plants. So we have to figure out as scientists, how can we transform these things to be safe for the humans, the equipment, and the plants? As if that wasn't enough problems, these space rocks that are crashing into the moon contain a lot of metals. So in this baby powder, fine, sticky dust, we also have a lot of metals. And these metals make the plants stressed out and sick, and they can even be taken up into the plant for the astronauts to eat, and we don't want to make them sick either. So those are really, really tricky things, and it makes it hard to use the moon dust to grow plants. But there's these cool things that we have on Earth. If you look at this picture, you see two little vials. On the left, you see a dark vial, and that's full of Earth soil. And it's rich, it's full of nutrients, and it's full of little beneficial microorganisms. Now, we can think of these microorganisms as almost invisible bugs that you can see with microscopes that are always breaking down dead leaves and dead plants and grass clippings, all kinds of things, breaking it down into a form that plants can then take back up. So it's a cycle. Now, on the moon, we don't have any of those trees and those grass and those nutrients, and we also don't have any of those friendly bugs. So what I do in my lab is we get to figure out what microorganisms and what nutrients can we put in this moon dust to make it healthy and constantly evolving, to make sure that it's no longer small, sharp, sticky, and dangerous, and instead we can extract all the nutrients that are present to grow crops. Now, if this interested any of you guys, there's actually some ways that you guys can participate and be scientists. So there's a project called Growing Beyond Earth, and teachers, this has funding available, and it is put on in collaboration with Fairchild Botanical Gardens and NASA scientists. Now, what you'll get to do here is actually get seeds and supplies from NASA and grow them in varying methods, run real experiments, collect data, send it back to NASA, and help them decide what plants should then be sent to space to be tested. It's a really cool project. They've had over 10,000 students participate, and they've actually selected many seeds that have been flown and grown aboard the International Space Station. This second project also has funding available, teachers. I believe that the window is open until December 4th, so you'd have to get on that quickly. And this one is more directly tied to growing plants on the moon. So what this program will do is it will give you a kit that contains moon dust, and you get to design an experiment. You get to figure out what seeds you think will work, what nutrients you think will work. How do you think we can address the problems that are growing plants on the moon. And then you can share your work with a bunch of other scientists, and awards will be given out afterwards. So these are all ways that you can get involved.
That's awesome. Super cool. All right. Are we ready for questions?
Yes.
All right, let's do it. Okay, first of all, why is moon dust sharp? Like, what is going on there? Like, why is it sharp there and not sharp here? Like, what?
That's a really, really great question. And it's kind of a complicated answer because there's many reasons.
Okay,
One reason is that the moon doesn't have an atmosphere like Earth does. So these rocks are going through space and they have nothing to slow it down or break it up. When you look in our sky and you see shooting stars and things, a lot of the time that's micrometeorites breaking up because our atmosphere protected us. So we don't have to worry about impacts too often. The moon doesn't have that. So all of the craters and all the things you can see with your naked eye when you look out there, that's from impacts. And those are going really, really fast. And it creates a really, really hot impact. And that hot impact turns this dust into glass.
that's wild. Okay, our first question is from Lulu in Kentucky. Why does part of the moon look black and part of the moon look white?
That's actually a really, really great question, Lulu. Thank you. So there's two different categories of the moon. There's the lunar highlands and the Maria. And the highlands are bright. Those are the higher areas. And the moon used to be a big ball of lava. So as it was cooling down, it had a lot of volcanic activity. And the dark spots that you see are where the lava flowed and settled. And the light spots you see are where there are higher mountains and it wasn't able to settle.
Cool. Thank you. When astronauts are on the moon now, I mean, the last time we were on the moon, when was the last time we were on the moon, actually?
I believe it was about 50 years ago.
50 years ago. Okay. So if we're planning to go back to the moon, is that right? Like soon.
Yes, we're sending astronauts back to the moon and the lunar surface on the Artemis 3 mission.
Cool. And how long are they
And
planning to
yeah,
be there?
so I'm not sure about the exact amount of time they're going to be there. It's not going to be too long because the moon has different light and day cycles than we do.
Uh-huh.
Sometimes a day can last 14, 15 days, and same with the night. So you don't want to be there in the night. You don't want to
Right.
be there in the cold. But they are going to be on the lunar surface, and we are going to have plants on the lunar surface that they're going to take out and leave and bring back.
Cool.
They're going to be on the lunar surface for 3 days, and then
Wow.
they're going to be sent back for testing to see what happens. So I know it's going to be at least 3 days, but I'm not privy to the information of how long it will total be.
So we've got a question from Arika. What are they eating now on the moon? Like since we can't currently grow food on the moon, what are astronauts eating when they're up there?
Well, astronauts are not on the moon yet, but right now they're on the International Space Station and they get resupply missions with things kind of like MREs that military soldiers eat, prepackaged, shelf stable, protected food that can withstand the environments in space.
Cool. Our next question is from Argyle. Do you plan to take worms up with you?
Um, so in my research in my lab, we actually do use worms. I had mentioned earlier that you can use bugs to break things down, microorganisms, but you can also use larger organisms like worms. And what we've done in my lab is we've used the astronauts' trash and we've let worms break it down to make a fertilizer to add that organic matter. There have been a few types of worms studied in space, but not the kind that we use. The kind that we use are the kinds you use for fishing or that you see on cartoons.
Yeah,
It would be a really cool thing to study, and it would be really helpful. I know there's a lot of researchers working on that right now.
really cool. We've got a fifth grade classroom that wants to know what are like the first three plants that you're planning on using or trying out?
First three. That's hard to choose, but I do have a favorite plant to grow in the moon dust, and I can tell you guys about that. And it's a chickpea. If you guys have ever had hummus, for
Yeah.
example, that's made out of chickpeas. And Chickpeas are really cool. Let me tell you why they're my favorite plant and why I would choose them. So, chickpeas are really friendly to microorganisms. They actually will encourage relationships with them to come and meet up with their roots and have the symbiosis like your bacteria did,
Uh-huh.
and they will protect the plant from the metals, from some radiation, from some issues they have. On top of that, they're really, really hardy. They're good at being stressed out, and they create a protein because we need to keep our muscles strong and healthy when we're in space. So that's my favorite plant, and that's the one that I've been working with in the regolith and that I would plant first on the moon.
Sounds good. Chickpeas. Okay. Our next question is, how hot does the moon get during its day, and how cold does it get during its night?
You know, that is a really, really good question. I'm not sure about the exact temperatures. I know that it's colder more than it is warm, and that the water that is on the moon remains permanently frozen. So it's something that we definitely have to be protected from, and it's not as comfortable as it is on Earth.
Yeah. Right. Shauna wants to know, how do plants on the ISS inside get sunshine? And is there a risk of them burning without our atmosphere?
So that's a really, really good question because they have much different light cycles on the International Space Station. So what they do is they actually send up lights. They send up lights that are specifically for the plants to grow, and they grow them in these controlled chambers and give them the exact kind of light in the exact kind of hours and wavelengths that they need because different plants need different types of light at different stages in their life. And we can manipulate that to help them grow better and to withstand some of these stresses.
Really cool. Thank you. Zane
Yeah.
wants to know, why do plants make people happy?
I would imagine if I was to be on a spaceship and far away from my home, having any little piece of Earth's beauty with me would just make my space home feel a little bit cozier.
Yeah. Here we go. Here's a good question. So we have our go-to moon, right? But there are all different kinds of moons on different planets. And are all moons able to grow plants on them, or is it like harder on different ones or easier on different ones?
I I think it would be hard to say whether it's easier or harder. I think that each moon is going to be compositionally different and made of different things and created in a different way. It's going to have different atmospheres, different temperatures, different problems that we have to deal with. So
Yeah.
they're all going to face their own challenges, but they all also might have, their own benefits.
Own opportunities. Very good. Cool.
Yeah.
We got a question from Ito. Do you think that cacti would be more resilient in space than other plants?
That's a really good question. And it's something I've honestly never thought about, but they are so tolerant and they are able to survive such amazing environments here that, yeah, I believe that they could be more tolerant. I think a fear that I would have is that we might be adding more problems with the sharpness and we might not be able to get as much yield to eat.
Yeah, they might be too slow growing. I'm not sure.
Yeah.
There's so many different cacti. They,
Hmm.
you never know. Yeah. Really good
It's
question.
so fun.
Really, yeah, we've got to think about that. That's a good one. We got a question from Aiden in North Carolina. Why does the moon have a different atmosphere than the Earth? And like what is an atmosphere, and like what makes up the different ones that we have between moon and Earth?
Oh, okay. Well, that's a really, really hard question to answer, and it's got a lot of parts to it, and it's also not my area of study. So bear with me. I'm going to do my best here. I know that the Earth is much larger, and I know that it has a different magnetism, so it's able to create an atmosphere. And in our atmosphere, we're able to contain all these gases like the oxygen and the water vapors and the things that plants are providing. But the moon is actually very small and doesn't have the magnetic core like we have. So that creates a problem in creating the atmosphere and protecting it.
Cool. Yeah, sounds good.
Yeah.
Basically, there's like long story short, higher density of gases and water on Earth.
Yes.
It's like hard to conceptualize when we're looking around in our air and it just feels like there's nothing there, but there's a lot going on in there compared to true nothing out in space.
Yes. Yes.
Cool. We got a question from Juliet in Georgia. What happens if the plants that you try to grow on the moon die? Will you try again?
Oh, yes, absolutely. This is a great question. So, a lot of science is figuring out what doesn't work, and a lot of the plants that I have grown in moondust have died. But the cool thing is with each generation of plants that we've grown, they have exuded something and they have changed something. So even though they have died, they have still served a purpose and made the regolith better for the future. So we may have to kill quite a few plants to get them to evolve and to the point where they can grow crops.
Yes. I think we a lot of times in science class, like particularly in younger grades, you get your science experiment that you're doing, right? And you kind of know it's going to work because your teachers and their teachers' teachers tested it over many years and like know that this thing, like when you put these two things together, we kind of know what's going to happen. But when you're an actual scientist, you are on the edge, and a lot of science is just failure, and you get used to that. Like failure becomes just like part of your day, and it doesn't have the sting. It's just like a
Yeah.
different way of learning things. So
Yeah.
failure is as important as success in science because now we know it's not that. Try the next thing. Yeah.
Yeah, it's actually just a puzzle that needs to be solved. It's not really a failure.
Right. It's just like, okay, negative to that result, try again, a little different. All right, we got a question from Jessica. How can we grow plants on the moon at a large scale without an atmosphere?
Oh, Jessica, that's a great question. So, to start with, because space is going to be very, very limited in the spaceship that you're on, the plants that are selected now to go to the ISS or the plants that I grow in my lab, they're dwarf plants. They're smaller plants. And we're not going to be able to grow on a large scale for quite a long time. We're at the very, very beginning of science, and we grow the smallest plants possible. It would be hard to grow something big like corn or wheat or a tree for quite a while until we establish a lunar base. We're just at the very, very beginning of this, but hopefully someday, at the time where these guys are scientists, maybe they can figure that out and we'll have gotten a little bit more work done.
Great. We got a question from
Yeah.
Archer from Spring Hill Elementary in Virginia. Why not use hydroponics?
Great question. And hydroponics are actually something that's currently being used in space agriculture. I think this has to be a situation where we use all things available. Of course, we're going to use hydroponics. That's great. But when we use hydroponics, we still have to be sending up nutrients. We still have to find water. There's still a bunch of bugs and things and problems that can happen with the hydroponics. So we want to make sure that we're exploiting everything possible on the lunar surface to grab those minerals, those nutrients as well, in conjunction with using hydroponics. We really need all hands and all methods on deck here.
Yeah, for sure. We got a question here. Do the on when plants are on their way to space and then on the moon or in on the ISS, a lot of times in ISS pictures we see astronauts just like floating around and like blobs of wood are floating around. Are the plants floating around? Like, how does that work?
So they would if they have the capability of doing that, but usually they're put in something to hold them down. I have seen instances on the ISS of them being put in somewhat of a plant pillow and being stuck down to a habitat so they stay in one place. I've also seen pictures of these plants being carried all around the ISS or floating around the ISS. So that could happen, but there's a lot of Velcro. There's a lot of ways to stick things down to make sure things aren't flying everywhere in the ISS.
Lots of straps for space. Yeah. All right, we got a question here. Are we still going to terraform Mars?
That is a great question, and that is a great idea. I think that's something that's going to be very, very, very far in the future. I wouldn't say it's outside of the realm of possibility, but I think it's going to take a very long time and a lot more advancement in knowledge, a lot more science to be done before that's an availability, capability.
Cool, thank you. We got a question from Maggie from Ohio. Which do you think will grow easier on the moon? Flowers, fruits, or vegetables?
That's a really good question. I think that all different plants are able to withstand different stressors. So I'm sure that there are some flowers that will do better than some vegetables, and some vegetables that will be better than some fruits. And it's a really cool time to go test all these different things and find the best of all of these worlds.
Cool. Got a question from Erica. Will plants adapt to the new environment on the moon, or can we modify the plants ahead of time to make them more resilient to whatever we're about to throw at them on the moon?
Great question. And I think the answer is yes to both of those. So plants adapt very, very quickly. They have a short life cycle. So things on a genetic level are going to change and adapt. But on top of that, of course, we can use therapies and technology we have to modify these plants to withstand more stressors. These are huge areas of science that are being studied by lots of scientists.
Very cool. Jeff would like to know, do astronauts on the ISS get to eat dessert?
I do believe I do believe they are able to, and maybe even make a few special requests to be sent up on the supply missions.
That's good. All right. Nini wants to know, can you get diseases in space?
Yeah, absolutely. You can get diseases, you can get sick. On the ISS, there's all kinds of those microorganisms we talked about. There's bacteria, there's fungi. Astronauts' bodies are already a little bit more stressed out from the reduced gravity and the radiation. So yeah, you can, that's absolutely possible. That's why we need to be very, very careful about everything we send up and how sterile it is, and we use really good practices so that no one gets sick because there's no hospital in space.
Yeah. Max wants to know, why haven't we been to the moon in 50 years? Like we went to the moon and then we were like, okay, we did it. Like why didn't we go back until now?
That's a really great question that I think a lot of us scientists ask. And I really do think a large portion of it has to do with funding. It costs a lot of money, it costs a lot of time, it takes a lot of people. There are thousands upon thousands of people working together just to get one mission off the ground. But right now, NASA is working on its Artemis missions, and we are getting humans back to the moon.
Great. Shauna would like to know, I know that a lot of plants have specialized cells that use the Earth's magnetism to grow in the correct direction. Is this a concern for growing plants on the moon?
Yes, that's called gravitropism, and it is one of the issues that we have that I talked about earlier, is that signals for the plant roots to grow down and anchor into the soil, kind of like a boat does in the ocean. And they don't have that same signal in space. So it does get kind of tricky, and you do need to figure out how to contain the roots and how to get them where they need and get them the nutrients and food and water they need because they're not quite sure where to go for them.
Right. I know for the squid stuff, so for those who don't know in the audience, I'm a squid biologist. And so there are these scientists that were studying squid in space effectively. And before they actually sent the squid to space, they did these like little what they called microgravity experiments, where they put them in a little thing that kind of takes the gravity away. I don't really know how that works, but do you do those experiments on Earth before sending the plants to the moon?
Oh, yes. So that equipment is called a clinostat,
Cool.
and it rotates.
Right.
It does rotate to create something similar to no gravity. It's very hard to create no gravity on Earth.
Right. Right.
So yeah, that is something that's studied, and all of these things are still being figured out. And that's the cool thing about science is every scientist studies a different thing and a different part about this, and we all come together and apply our knowledge to make, one thing work.
Yeah,
It
totally.
takes, it takes a team, yeah.
Really does take a team for doing most things. All right. K Slack wants to know, does climate change affect plants growing on the moon?
Does climate change on Earth affect plants growing on the moon?
I suppose.
That's a very good question. Climate change is affecting our plants growing here on Earth, And a cool thing about the plants on the moon is the things that we learn about how to grow plants on the moon with an environment that is dry and doesn't have a lot of nutrients and is very stressful can be applied to the problems that are being caused by climate change on Earth, because climate change on Earth is also making things more dry, nutrients less available, plants more stressed out. So anything we learn in space, we can apply to the problems like climate change right here on Earth.
Absolutely. Good answer.
Yeah.
We got a third grade class that wants to know, why are you trying to grow plants on the moon? Why don't you just grow them in spaceships? Like, what are the pluses and minuses for those two environments?
Absolutely. That's a wonderful question. So, when we establish a permanent presence on the moon, we're going to have a lunar orbiter called the Gateway. And the spaceships will be sent from Earth to the lunar orbiter, where some people will be, and then they will have to make their way down to the moon. So we'll kind of be an intermediate area. And I think that it's important that we are growing plants in all of these environments, because in an area where it's so hard to get resupplies, we need to have plants in every environment we can, just in case. Make sure we're always healthy and strong.
Very cool. Thank you. Rebecca wants to know, how long does it take to get to the moon?
Oh, this is a great question. This is a really wonderful question. So it also has a complicated answer. It depends on where the Earth is. Where are you leaving from? Where is the moon at? It can be anywhere from 3 days to 30 days. It all depends about the positioning of the Earth to the moon. Also, what kind of spaceship are you taking? How much weight are you carrying? Are you trying to get to the moon? Or are you trying to go even further and get onto the moon? So all of these things make it a little more complex and change the amount of time it will take.
Really cool. Thank you. Michelle wants to know, is there a target year for planting plants on the moon?
So I believe that the Artemis 3 missions are scheduled for 2026, 2027. Things are constantly moving. Those are not solid dates, but we are planning on sending plants to the moon, three different kinds of plants to the moon on this mission. They won't be planted directly in the moon dust, but they will be inside of a box that is put on the surface of the moon to grow
Okay, so plants
in the
in
next few years.
plants in a plants in not directly on like moon dirt.
No.
Okay.
So, unfortunately, the environment on the moon is really rough.
Yeah.
So, the plants are going to have the same protections that the astronauts have. So, we won't be
Okay.
able to probably ever plant directly in the moon dirt. But what we could do is we could grab that and bring it inside of its own habitat that has the protections, the same kind of protections of the astronauts, and do our gardening there,
Cool.
like a
Okay.
moon greenhouse.
Like a moon greenhouse, totally. Team Yates in Virginia asks, how do they water the plants, and does the moon require more water than on Earth?
That's a really good question. So there's a few different ways that you can water plants. You can use quite a few different types of substrates. It does get tricky when you have the reduced gravity, because you have to make sure it stays in one place and goes to the roots and is contained. And so a lot of the times they'll use foams, or they'll just use aeroponic systems that spray the water at them, but it's contained. So nothing gets out and water is flying everywhere.
Right, right. Cool. Kiki from Virginia wants to know, is the moon day slash Earth day relationship disorienting? Does it feel like jet lag for people?
That's a really, really great question. I have
Cool.
never
Yeah.
heard this question before. Yeah, but
Nice.
considering that, a lunar day, a day on the moon can last 14 days of light and then 14 days of dark, like absolutely, I could see that being something you'd really have to adjust to.
I wonder if it's kind of like when you go to these places near the poles where it's like light for weeks, you know? I like northern Sweden, or it's just like always light or always dark. I bet it's like that, but I don't really
Mhm.
know. Yeah. On the space station, what's the day-night cycle? Do they keep it 12-12?
Well, there's a lot of sunrises and a lot of sunsets when you're on the ISS, and it's going to be a little bit different when you get to the moon, because the ISS is only 250 miles above us right now.
Right.
That's such a cool fact to me. When we go to the moon, we're going quite a bit farther, so things shift a little bit, and we're also in a different orbit.
Mm, so weird.
Yeah.
Oh, spooky. Okay. Oh, we got a question from Jeff. Could growing components of Earth's ecosystem be moved to the moon to support life and a biodome type structure be constructed to support the ongoing life on the moon? And what are the limitations of constructing something like that?
Absolutely. Absolutely, that is possible. I think it might be a little bit far in the future as we're still trying to get the basics, but it's a great idea. And that's actually something that we work on in our lab is which microorganisms from Earth
Mhm.
are the most beneficial, can survive the most stress, and can we put on the moon to constantly be regenerating and making a living soil. So if we can do that and eventually engineers could come in and, like you said, build some kind of biosphere or something, that would be amazing. And I've seen a lot of concepts and a lot of people looking into that type of research.
Really cool. Ike wants to know, when there are plants on the moon, can we put animals over time on the moon? A bunch of people have asked something to this effect. Like we can, once you figure out how to do plants, are you planning to add animals too?
I mean, I could see that happening when we have established a colony and there's more space and we've got things figured out. I probably wouldn't go with really big animals like a giraffe, but maybe we could consider smaller things.
Cool.
That's a great
Okay.
idea.
Yeah. Cool.
Yeah.
James from eighth grade wants to know, why don't we just bring dirt to the moon?
Great question. And that's a fair question. Honestly, it's really heavy. It's
Yeah.
really heavy and really expensive. So, the whole idea with using microorganisms is bringing as little as possible. And then the way to add the nutrients is by recycling the astronaut waste. So, what we're doing here is not necessarily bringing any more weight that we have to carry in our spaceships, but using every single thing we have available to make a new soil.
Very cool. Argyle, eighth grade or fifth grade wants to know, how long does it take for a plant to evolve?
You know, that's hard to say because plants, just like humans, we all live to be, a different age. Some plants are fast-growing plants. They can bloom within 14 days. My chickpeas that I grow take 120 days. There's trees out there that are hundreds and hundreds of years old. So the type of growth cycle you have is going to play a big part in how long it takes things to evolve. So the smaller plants are going to be able to evolve quicker because they're having babies quicker and they're changing their genetic material quicker. So yeah, it's totally possible, and it depends based off of what plant you're growing.
Yeah, there are some organisms that can start evolving in like days. Like
Yes.
bacteria, the bacteria I
Mhm.
used to work with, 20 minutes was their generation time. So every 20
Amazing.
minutes they were having a baby, not, having a bacterial baby. And so they would evolve so fast. It would be it was wild. Truly wild. Um Also in huge numbers. So a lot of them would also, if we like challenged them, a lot of them would die. But just because there were so many of them, a couple of them would survive. It was fun. At least interesting. Okay. Anonymous. Oh, Kiki wants to know, how would you transport the worms from space? Because worms don't live very long. And how do you protect the worms from the radiation? Um, isn't it dangerous for a worm up there?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Great question. It's dangerous for humans, it's dangerous
Dangerous
for
for everybody.
plants, it's dangerous for worms. Um, you can Worms are pretty mellow. They're pretty easy to transport and they don't take up a lot of space and they reproduce rather quickly. So it would be pretty easy to just take a little box of worms and let them do their thing, let them recycle garbage, let them reproduce, and we wouldn't need to take that many. They would need to be inside the habitat, have the same protections as the astronauts and everybody else. We don't want to make the worms suffer. But it's totally possible, and that's a great question.
Great. Thank you. Here's just like a slightly different question from Ember. Is the moon noticeably smaller than the Earth when you're standing on it? Like when you're standing on the moon, does it feel like you're on a smaller thing than when you're standing on the Earth?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I've watched a lot of videos of the accounts of the astronauts that have been to the moon, and they describe it as pretty much an indescribable feeling about how small the world is and how small humanity is and how we are all connected. So I could imagine through, just reading and watching their testimonies that, yeah, at that moment, the moon just must feel really big and you must feel really far from home.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, that seems really spooky. Space freaks me out, to be honest. Just makes me just scared. I prefer the ocean. It scares me. All right. Okay. Adam asks, how are plants supposed to get water on the moon? Are you providing all of the water for them?
Yes, yes. Everything is going to have to be, brought for a little while, which is why we're researching how can we use the resources that are available on the moon. That's like there is frozen ice on the moon. There are nutrients inside of the moon dust. There's all the essential nutrients that plant needs, but maybe they're not in the form that plant needs them. So for quite a while until things are established, we're going to have to bring everything the plants need and everything the humans need.
Very cool. Ms. Sunderman's class wants to know, will the food that's grown on the moon taste the same as the food that's grown here on Earth?
That's a cool question, and that's something that the Spacecraft Production Lab they have been doing. They actually do taste testing
Hmm.
on these different varieties of things in space and things on Earth, and I believe that there are some differences. And I've read an account of the astronauts saying things in space taste better, but I wonder if that's just because they're so excited to get fresh food.
Yeah. We know that things taste different on airplanes, but I thought it
Hmm.
tasted worse. So I don't know. I don't know. I don't know. Weird. Cool. Yeah, maybe if all you've eaten is like freeze-dried nonsense for 2 weeks, any tomato is going to be the best thing you've ever eaten. Very cool. Ethan wants to know, this is going to be our last audience question. We still have 233 questions, so I'm sorry, everybody, if we didn't get to yours. We tried. Ethan asks, what is moon dust missing for plants to grow?
That's a great question. So, there are three major things that plants need, and then a lot of little things. But the major things are NPK, nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. Now, the moon has all of these things, but it has a very, very small amount of nitrogen. We can provide that, hopefully, by recycling astronaut waste and using our worms. But it also has phosphorus, calcium, sulfur, silica, all kinds of yummy vitamins and minerals and nutrients that plants need. So that's why it's so important to try to use it to see if we can grow dust and not bring all of those things with us.
Yeah. Great. All right.
Yeah.
So we like to ask everybody the same two questions at the end of every session. The first question is if you had everybody's attention in the whole world and you could ask them, or you could tell them one thing about your area of expertise, what would it be?
I wouldn't say it's specifically just about my area of expertise, but I would just tell you guys to stay curious, to ask questions. That's how I got to where I am studying what I am. I just looked at something and I was like, I wonder what would happen, and I wonder how we can change that. So it's possible for anyone, including you guys, as long as you be brave and stay curious and ask the questions.
Great. All right. Our second question is very similar. It's if you have everybody's attention in the whole world and you can tell them anything about anything. It could be as significant and important or like trivial and silly, like, you know, related to Godzilla movies, whatever you want. What do you tell them?
That is a really great question. I haven't thought of that. I would I would say to dream big. I would say to go for everything. I would say if you want to do something, just go for it. Don't tell yourself no. Take that chance and believe in yourself.
Co-sign that. Good answer.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you for taking the time to share your knowledge with us today. This was super, super cool. Very fun. And thank you everybody for joining us for this conversation. Thank you for bringing your curiosity and asking all of your questions. Again, one more time, if you want a session for just your class, we have scientists from all over the world studying all different kinds of things. It is free. Just go ahead on skypeascientist.com and request a session for your class. I'm always so thrilled when so many people attend these sessions. And then also I'm like, oh my God, we couldn't get through all the questions. We got through a lot. We got through 51 questions, which is pretty good. But we still have over 200 unanswered. So if you have questions, like just don't be shy in requesting a session. Jess, is there anything else you'd like to plug? Anything else you want us to know before we say goodbye?
No, if you guys have any questions, feel free to reach out. And also, if you do the Plant the Moon challenge, that is something that I'm happy to mentor in and give you
Great.
guys any tips and tricks to growing things in moon dust.
Awesome. Thank you. I think I'm going to put the links to those two programs you mentioned in the notes of the YouTube video that we post. Um, that
Okay.
that so people can easily access that. All right, then we'll see everybody next time. We'll be talking about the art of the microscope. Next month, you can go to skypeascientist.com, live streams, sign up for free there. Jess, thanks for joining. Ashley, thank you for interpreting. We will see you all next time.
Bye.
Bye.